Good afternoon, and welcome to the fourth episode of Water Solutions for Our Warmer World. This afternoon, our topic is drought in the Colorado River Basin. We have an array of experts on this topic to share their perspectives with you, and we look forward to their comments. On behalf of the Arizona Institutes for Resilience, the Office of Research, Innovation, and Impact at the University of Arizona, and our co-sponsors, the Water Resources Research Center and the Udall Center for Studies in Public Policy, I'd like to thank you for joining us this afternoon and thank the staff of the Arizona Institutes for Resilience for their support. My name is Kathy Jacobs, and I'm the director of the Center for Climate Adaptation Science and Solutions, which is within the Arizona Institutes for Resilience. We are going to give you a few Zoom tips before we proceed. First of all, please use the Q&A area at the bottom of your Zoom window to submit questions for the panelists. We've already received quite a number of questions that we will be addressing today, but if you have additional ones, please use the Q&A portion. It will be at the end of the episode, and we'll try to address a broad cross-section of the questions that we received. This episode is being recorded because we will be posting it later for people who weren't able to attend today. And we want to make sure that people have an opportunity to ask further questions if they'd like to. So feel free to contact either Sharon or myself if you have additional questions. We hope to learn about what works and what doesn't. And so we will be sending you a follow-up survey at the end for you to provide feedback. We are thrilled that there are around 300 of you joining us for this conversation today. Before we begin, I just want to note that this is actually the fourth in a 6-part series. It's dedicated to our former colleague, Jim Shuttleworth, a Regents professor who worked at the University of Arizona for several decades. He's played a major role in understanding the role of the water cycle and how it relates to climate change. He passed away this last December. There's more about his life, family, and a video about his contributions in the chat. I'm now going to introduce tonight's moderator, Sharon Megdal, who is the director of the University of Arizona's Water Resources Research Center, a cooperative extension center and research unit in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. Sharon also served for 11 years as an elected representative of Pima County on the board of the Central Arizona Project. Sharon and I have known each other for close to 40 years and share a longtime interest in water management and policy. I'm going to turn it over to you now, Sharon. Take it away.
All right. Thank you so much, Kathy. And I'd like to welcome all of you here and thank you for joining us for what should be a very informative, interesting, stimulating discussion. And we are going to explore, as Kathy indicated, drought, shortage in the Colorado River Basin, what's been done to prepare, some of the challenges, but importantly, the solutions, what people have done to prepare for this drier world, the warmer world we're living in. We do encourage you to put questions in the Q&A, and the way we'll run this is we are going to start with a short presentation by Leslie Myers of the Bureau of Reclamation, and I'll give Leslie a proper introduction in just a moment. And then after Leslie's presentation, I will introduce the panelists, the expert panelists we have from throughout the basin, who will then share some remarks before going into question and answer. So Leslie, who's also a friend to all of us, you get to become friends with a lot of the people on the screen as you've known them over time. Leslie is the area manager for the Phoenix area office of the U.S. Department of Interior's Bureau of Reclamation. As the area manager, Leslie is very active in the oversight of the reclamations projects in Arizona, the Salt River Project and the Central Arizona Project, and in statewide water resource issues with a wide range of constituents, including Native American tribes, agricultural, municipal water users. These efforts include water conservation and reuse, water quality and desalination, water sufficiency, and water development. And Leslie, we really appreciate your being with us today to kind of get us all the foundation of just where we are and things are in the Colorado River Basin. I'll turn it over to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sharon and Kathy, and thanks to everyone for joining today. I appreciate you sharing your afternoon with me. Perfect. Thank you so much. So let's get started with the presentation. We can go to the second slide. So I know that this workshop is really revolving around solutions. And so I promise you I'm going to get to some kind of the how are we responding. But I do have to start with the status of the basin, especially the lower basin of the Colorado River. And for those of you that know me, I'm a glass half full kind of person for a water analogy. So it pains me very much to start with the bad news, but we are going to start with the bad news today, the rough news, and we'll come back around to the good news at the end. So talking about the Colorado River drought, the Colorado River is currently experiencing a historic drought, and the period from 2000 to 2021 is projected to be the driest 22-year period of record. In addition, the period from 2012 to 2021 is projected to be the driest 10-year period ever recorded, which ousts the previous driest 10 years, which were 2000 to 2009. Only 5 years, there's been only 5 years of above average inflow in the past 21 years. The observed 2021 April through July runoff in the basin was a mere 26% of average. And to add to the bad news, both Lake Powell and Lake Mead reached their historic low levels in 2021. Let's move to the next slide, please. So what have we done? And what have we done in the past, and how are we implementing those things now? Starting in the early 2000s, there were 5 years of unprecedented drought. There had never been a shortage in the lower basin, and as a matter of fact, we had surplus guidelines, but no shortage guidelines. So in 2007, guidelines were established, which provided for the coordinated operations between Lake Powell and Lake Mead. The 2007 interim guidelines provided new tools for our toolbox. It provided us flexible use and management of Colorado River water through specific programs like the intentionally created surplus program. It also created a strategy for implementing shortages in the lower basin. It was an interim period through December 31st of 2025. And it also provided that the basin states, for the basin states to agree to consult before resorting to litigation. So next slide. So per the 2007 guidelines, the August 24-month study is the predictor of whether or not the basin, the lower basin, is considered in a drought condition. So here's the projected January 1, 2022 elevations in Lake Powell and Lake Mead. You can see what they do is they leave us in a mid-elevation released year in Lake Powell and in our first ever declared shortage condition in the lower basin. Next slide, please. So the 2007 guidelines were the foundation. And on top of the foundation, we layered the drought contingency plans. So the drought contingency plans were actually established because the system perceived increased risk from temporary or prolonged interruptions in water supplies and associated adverse impacts to the society, environment, and the economy of the Colorado River. What we saw was increasing risks based on drier conditions in the basin. Besides the, oh, sorry, we're going to go back to the other slide. I'm going to watch my time really carefully. So on top of the, there was a couple of things that the DCP did that were really important. One, it incorporated minutes 319 and 323 and the binational water scarcity plan into, which meant Mexico was an additional contributor in the DCP. It also addressed increasing risk. It developed and tested on an interim basis additional operational tools, so advancements in the ICS program. And it really strove, as opposed to the 07 guidelines, which didn't protect a specific elevation, it strove to protect elevation 1020. It tried to protect the system from declining below elevation 1020 in Lake Mead, and provided for a 1030 consultation, which meant if any 24-month study predicted elevation 1030 in the ensuing 24 months, then we would consult with the states and look for additional actions that could be taken to protect those elevations. Okay, let's go on. Next slide. So these slides are very important because they show us those predictions. Here we have the Lake Mead end of month elevations predicted in for the next 24 months. We have the maximum probable on the top line, the most probable on the green line, and the min probable in the red line. And you can see that we drop below 1030 sometime around June of 2023. Let's look at the next slide, which shows similarly dire predictions in potential predictions, especially at the min elevations at Lake Powell. And this, the considerations here revolve around primarily the minimum power pool at Lake Powell. So let's go on to the next slide 8, please. So what have we been doing? I'll recap this probably later, but we've been implementing the 2007 guidelines and the DCP. We've been in the Upper Basin, we've worked on drought response actions, and in anticipation of a 1030 consultation and on a reconsultation for post-2026 guidelines, we've been working very, very closely with our partners. I know we'll have some more discussion today about tribes. We've worked closely with tribes in Arizona and throughout the basin. One thing I think that's important to note throughout this, when we talked about expanding our tools in our toolbox, we have instituted very specific programs from ICS to pilot system conservation. Over the years, we have the drought MOU and work with Mexico. And we've actually been able to, through those programs, prop up the lake about 65 feet, which has prolonged the date. It has pushed off the date that we would have had to declare a drought and shortage in the basins. So I guess that's the good news, that we've learned a lot throughout that process. The stark reality is that we're here today, and we can talk some more about that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Leslie. This wasn't a scripted question, but that last photo in your presentation, what year was that taken? You don't have to answer that, but it looks like water levels look pretty good in that photo, but maybe that's just because it's of a distance. But so thank you for that. Sobering as it is, it's reality and what we're dealing with. And so thank you for giving us that excellent overview. Now we're going to go into, I'm going to introduce our panelists. I ask that the panelists turn on their camera as I introduce you. I will be introducing all of the panelists first, and then each will have up to 5 minutes to make some opening comments. And then it will be after that we'll take some questions. So first, it's my great pleasure to introduce every one of the panelists. So I'm just so excited. Chairwoman Amelia Flores is the elected chairwoman of the Colorado River Indian Tribes, known as CRIT, whose reservation is located along the border of Arizona and California. As chairwoman, she oversees all aspects of the tribal government and is active in water issues and irrigation-related activities. Welcome, Chairwoman Flores. We have Chairwoman Gloria Gray from the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California Board of Directors. Gloria Gray is the second woman and first person of color to serve as the chair of the Metropolitan Water District Board. She's the first African-American woman to serve as vice chair. She's got a lot of firsts here. And I want to note that she's a member of the West Basin Municipal Water District Board of Directors, where she's immediate past president. And that's where I first had the pleasure of meeting you, Gloria Gray. Next will be Terry Goddard, who's president of the board for the Central Arizona Water Conservation District. Mr. Goddard is also an attorney with the Goddard Law Office. He served as mayor of Phoenix from 1984 to 1990 and was the Arizona Attorney General from 2003 to 2011. So a lot of elected office experience. Welcome, Terry. It's good to see you, even virtually. Paul Boucher is an agricultural representative and a member of both the Colorado River Basin Roundtable and the Interbasin Compact Committee. He also chairs Grand County's Open Lands, Rivers and Trails Advisory Committee and is a member of the Colorado Water Trust Board. And we're very pleased you're welcoming us here and going to bring in some agricultural Upper Basin perspectives. So thank you for being here with us. And our fifth panelist is Taylor Hawes, who's also a friend to many. She's the Colorado River Program Director for the Nature Conservancy. In this role, her responsibilities include coordinating TNC's, the Nature Conservancy's freshwater conservation efforts across the Colorado River Basin, synthesizing priority strategies, working with key stakeholders who are critical to conservation success across the Colorado River Basin, and also working on fundraising. And though you work basin-wide, you're a resident of the Upper Basin. So I just want to go on record here that we have two people living in the Upper Basin with us today, and we thank you for joining us. So I'm going to turn it over first to Chairwoman Flores for some opening remarks. Thank you so much.
Kuchkamadoo, greetings. And thank you, Sharon, and your staff for inviting me. And it's my honor to be part of this panel today. I believe I may be the only person on this panel who lives on the banks of the Colorado River. And long before the dams and the canals were built, my ancestors lived on the bank of this mighty river. I am Mohave. My people, the Mohave, have always lived along the river with the Chemehueves, the Quetzans, and the Cocopas. Our ancient trails connect us along the river. We fish and gather the native plants and are tied to the river through our songs, our cultural locations, and ancient sites such as the intaglios on the mesa lands along the river. And we have endured many a drought. We know the river very well, and from a different perspective, one that is inherent. We farmed with the river's waters when it flooded every spring and brought the silt to enrich our lands. We are farmers at CRIT. Today, we farm about 80,000 acres in Arizona, and we have smaller parcels in California. We also have reservation lands within the Palo Verde Irrigation District. Our water rights are the first priority in the lower basin, and we are the largest user of the Colorado River water in Arizona. Our water rights date from 1865 when the reservation was established. We have the right to divert 719,000 acre feet of water, or enough water to irrigate 108,000 acres, whichever is less. Most of the irrigated lands are on the Arizona side of the reservation that is served by the Colorado River Irrigation Project that is owned by the United States, operated by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Our land and our water on the California side of our reservation are not as large or well developed as on the Arizona side. We have close to 57,000 acres on the California side of the river. We are rehabilitating about 400 acres on the California side that will include a habitat corridor along the river. We hope to eventually create a habitat corridor along the west bank of the river that will run for miles so that the deer and the smaller animals may return to this area. As you know, we are in a rural location and our tribal government depends on our farm revenue to operate and to provide the governmental services that our people depend on, such as police and fire protection, and our care for the elderly and programs for the youth. The longer-term goals of this tribal council include developing an on-reservation economy that is less volatile and more diverse. We plan to use our water rights to do so. For example, during the pandemic, the revenue from our system conservation agreement with Arizona was one of our most stable sources of revenue. This is why the federal legislation to authorize us to lease our water rights for use in Arizona is critical for our economic stability. As we gather to talk about what is next for operations of the Colorado River, I admit that I am worried about the river. I am worried that the life and culture of the Mohave people is at risk, and also for our sister tribes along the Colorado River. The massive infrastructure that takes water to grow cities, combined with climate change, could destroy this river. We are making our water available through system conservation to contribute to efforts to save the life of the river, and will continue to do so. This requires fallowing thousands of acres of productive farmland, which has its own financial, economic, and cultural costs. This river, the Colorado River, does have a life of its own, and a life in relation to all the fish, the plants, the critters, the people, including those of us at Crit who live along its shorelines. No matter our legal priorities for water or the terms of the law of the river, we must all participate through contributions of water and reduction in water use if this river is going to survive. Yamam Ekka. I look forward to our conversations today. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairwoman Gray. I think you have to unmute.
Thank you. Thank you, Sharon, for inviting me. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to be here with all of you and certainly with my fellow panelists. You know, it's critical that we're talking about how this prolonged drought on the Colorado River is affecting tens of millions of people across the Southwest who rely on this water resource. This includes the organization I represent as board chairwoman, the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. Metropolitan was formed nearly 100 years ago when 13 cities came together to build the Colorado Aqueduct to bring water 242 miles across the Mohave Desert to a growing Southern California. In the late 1950s, recognizing the need for additional supplies to meet growing post-water demands, Metropolitan signed on to contract for water for Northern California. Today, that statewide system, the State Water Project, provides about 30% of the water used in Southern California in an average year. Of course, there's nothing average about this year. We're getting just 5% of our contracted amount, tying the record low allocation in 2014. Metropolitan is the largest municipal water provider in the nation. Through our 26 member agencies, we serve a 5,200 square mile service area featuring 19 million residents from Ventura County to the Mexican border and from the coastline to the Inland Empire. That's half the population of California and one out of every 17 Americans. Over the years, Metropolitan role has evolved and adapted. We're not just an importer of water, we're a regional water planner, a manager, and steward of our resources. We know that ensuring reliability decades into the future will require us to innovate, to think differently, to make big investments in our water network, and expand our local water supplies. The drought we're facing only underscores the importance of these actions. In addition to the record low deliveries from our Northern California supply, we are all experiencing never before seen conditions in the Colorado River system. The river, which in normal years provides about 25% of Southern California's water, is seeing its first ever shortage in the lower basin. By working with our partners on the river to add water to Lake Mead through various conservation and supply investments, we've been successful in delaying a shortage until this year. But the situation we're facing is a wake-up call for us to accelerate our goal to develop more local water supplies and to push our region to conserve even more. Last month, our board, the Metropolitan Board, declared a water supply alert. It sent a strong signal to Southern California that it's time to elevate our response to this crisis, which has been exacerbated by climate change. We're asking our residents and businesses to build on the region's progress in conservation and water efficiency to save even more water. We're also investing in local supplies that reduce our reliance on the river. For example, our proposed regional recycle water program would allow us to reuse water currently sent to the ocean. It would create a new drought-proof supply for hundreds of thousands of families in Southern California. This project, in partnership with the Los Angeles County Sanitation District, will purify wastewater to produce sustainable, high-quality supplies that can be used again. We are currently operating a demonstration plant, and moving forward, our project could eventually become one of the nation's largest advanced water treatment facilities. Investing in recycled water isn't new for Metropolitan. We've been helping to fund recycled water projects for 30 years, but this project is unique in its size and its scale. It is also the first local supply project that Metropolitan is building for the region. This project also is helping to create new, innovative partnerships, something we need to see more of. We're working with Arizona through the Central Arizona Project and Nevada through the Southern Nevada Water Project. Both of these agencies are exploring opportunities to partner with us to develop the project in exchange for benefits along the Colorado River. Our agricultural partnership have also been key. We support following programs and on-farm conservation projects that maintain agricultural productivity while enhancing the reliability of Colorado River supplies. Examples of our partnership include those with BART Water District, Palo Verde Irrigation District, and Imperial Irrigation District. Metropolitan is also working with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, Central Arizona Project, Southern Nevada Water Authority, and Palo Verde Irrigation District to fund a short-term agricultural land following program in California that would conserve water on a large scale to help add water to Lake Mead. Metropolitan is also currently exploring a new potential seasonal following pilot program with the Kusan Indian tribe. This would help reduce water in the Kusan Indian tribal land to augment Metropolitan's Colorado River supplies. Metropolitan has successfully collaborated with tribes across our region on many water agreements. They are another important partner on the river, and we're committed to environmental stewardship and research. Through our participation in the Lower Colorado River Multi-Species Conservation Program, we are helping to preserve 8,100 acres of vital important habitat. Our partnerships are more important than ever as we begin negotiating a new set of guidelines for the Colorado River. Metropolitan stands ready to work together with our neighbors across the basin, the 7 basin states, California, Nevada, Arizona, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and Wyoming, tribes, the federal government, and Mexico, and the environmental community to ensure our communities continue to have access to clean, safe, and reliable water. I'm looking forward to working with all of you as we meet this challenge. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairwoman Gray. I would like to ask the panelists, even when you're done speaking, you mute yourself, but leave your camera on. That seems to be what works for the whizzes and wizards behind the scenes who are helping broadcast this. So thank you. Next, Terry Goddard, please.
Thank you, Sharon. And thank you so much for pulling together this discussion of our critical Colorado Basin water supply. I think only you could have done this, and it's a tour de force. I'm here on behalf of the Central Arizona Project, the CAP, which is a reclamation project authorized in 1968. I'm preaching to the choir. I'm sure most of you know our data, but I'll go through it quickly. We manage a canal that's 336 miles long. It goes from the Colorado River at Parker to south of Tucson. In Phoenix, it started delivering water in 1985 and was finished in the 1990s. Serves about 80% of the population of Arizona and has a huge economic impact. We also have customers of 11 tribal governments. So we have a broad reach within the center part of the state of Arizona. We take about half of Arizona's Colorado River allocation of 2.8 million acre feet. The rest of it, of course, is used on the river. I want to thank Chairwoman Gray for her leadership and the statements that she just made about collaboration within the basin and specifically within the lower basin, because this is new and this is important for dealing with the crisis that we're facing. The panel was asked a simple question: what does shortage mean for your organization? And in the case of the CAP, it's pretty simple: 512,000 acre feet. That's what a tier 1 shortage means for us. That's how much reduction of water we will see in 2022. That's 1/3 of our total capacity. Our normal operating volume has been about 1.5 to 1.6 million acre feet a year. And obviously 512 is a huge hit in the head. And a couple of points have already been made that we saw this crisis coming for a long time. We planned carefully along with reclamation and along with our other basin partners. And the result is that it's not a shock to the users in Arizona that we're having this very serious cutback in our water supply, renewable water supply from the Colorado River. It's not desirable. It's not something we like. But again, there has been no, let's just say, panic and emergency consternation for the last, ever since the flow started, and even before. In 1980, Arizona passed a groundwater code in preparation for receiving surface water. Since then, we've used any drop of extra water to conserve and put into the ground and to use against a problem like this. So we saw it coming and we're well prepared. But saying that, I believe that we and all the other water users in the basin need to be considering the tier 1 shortage as not just a administrative note that we deal with and roll on. It's a change. It's a very serious challenge to us going forward. What we're doing at CAP, and we're jointly with, it's already been said by Metropolitan, we're looking at other ways that water can be brought into the system. Augmentation is the word. We're looking at desal in the Gulf of Baja California. We're partnering with Metro prospectively about the very innovative program that they've undertaken for water purification in the Los Angeles area. We're looking with the cities in Arizona about doing a better job of purifying their wastewater and perhaps putting it to more reuse within our basin. We're looking at fallowing, as Chairwoman Gray has already said. That's short-term solution, but it's an important part of the long-term water effort while we make the necessary investments for these long-term augmentation efforts. Looking ahead, as I said, I think this is very serious. We're taking it very seriously. It's going to require in our area a change of behavior. For too long, I think in Arizona and perhaps other parts of the basin, although I'm not pointing fingers, we've acted like the Colorado River was an inexhaustible supply. The tier 1 shows us that it isn't, and that we've got to change the way we do business. That means we need to stop subsidizing water wasting industry. That means we need to look at some of the changes that we can make in the use of turf and the use of water that just isn't consistent with the desert environment. And that's the kind of thing that we're going to be looking at over the next several years. And we got to pull together and find ways to make every drop of our water go further. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you, Terry. Paul Boucher, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Sharon, Kathy, and all. It's a privilege and an honor to be here tonight, especially the opportunity to connect with our lower basin friends and partners. I very much appreciate the comments of the previous panelists and some of the ongoing efforts in the lower basin. Briefly, I'm a 5th generation Colorado farmer and rancher. And as Chairwoman Flores pointed out, the Colorado River is beyond the cottonwood trees here in the background. I too live on the Colorado River, and I'm about 35 miles west of the Continental Divide, so truly right in the headwaters area. The county that I live in the state of Colorado is the most heavily trans-basin diverted county in the state, with about 65% of our native flows where I stand today flowing to the east side of the divide instead of here through my family's property. With that, of all of the different trans-basin diversion projects and all the agreements over time, the Colorado River through this stretch really never saw a true shortage of concern, at least for agriculture, until 2002. And in 2002, we saw the first river condition of what could be our future, and it was quite frightening. Most irrigation systems for agriculture were not developed to a point to be able to divert water at that kind of a flow through what was, in perspective, this stretch of river historically non-diverted would flow, peak flow on June 3rd of about 6,100 cubic feet per second. And in present day with agreements, its basic base minimum flow, if diversion projects are happening, is 150 CFS. So we were looking at a river that dropped from 6,100 historically to 150. The good news is we have a wonderful community of ag producers. We have a wonderful community of the state of Colorado and process in the state. What I would call a coalition or a collaborative to start to address some of these issues. While I'm a 5th generation rancher, I also operate a fishing business and rely on a healthy river for recreational purposes to help sustain my family business and my way of making a living. And so when we saw that happen, and it was really an 02, 03, 04, 05 event, really to get back on track up here, we knew we needed change. And so I feel that my neighbors and others involved in the work that we've been doing have been proactively working on our river, not only in further partnership, but also through physical construction of projects, both to enhance irrigation diversions create a narrower low flow river channel for the health of the fishery. Most of our projects are really a combination of agriculture and river resiliency all in one. And it's been a pleasure to be a part of. With that, as I mentioned, state process, state of Colorado has its basin roundtables. We're very organized and communicate on how this works, all as kind of a branch of the Colorado Water Conservation Board. I became very involved in 2012. With that, the conversation part of the role of the Upper Basin right now is our drought contingency plan is to explore the feasibility of demand management, temporary, voluntary, compensated way of saving water. And as conversations with that have gone on for years and years, within the roundtable itself, we identified some certain gaps, and a particular researcher, Dr. Perry Cabot, was quite concerned that most of West Slope Colorado River water irrigation is high altitude perennials. And while there had been many studies on annual crops and different forms of irrigation, evapotranspiration, and consumptive use of the crop, there seemed to be a little bit of a data gap associated with not only how much water we use as high altitude perennials, most of us some form of livestock operation, but with that, not only what that data gap is, but how and the best way to actually measure and verify what it is we're using. So with that, the Colorado Basin Roundtable moved forward with many partners, including Taylor and TNC on this call, State of Colorado, American Rivers, the Nature Conservancy, Trout Unlimited, Colorado State University, and Utah State University to launch a project of pretty significant scale to actually measure what it is we're doing. So essentially, I asked 9 families that are my friends and neighbors in Grant County last year in one of our driest summers on record to turn off their head gates and see what happens when we dry up their meadows. We tested different forms of actual verification of consumptive use, and I'm not a scientist. I'm the rancher that coordinated. The scientists are with the different academics that worked on this. But some of that all leading to the point to do some truth testing on remote sensing associated with evapotranspiration and what it really means. The project was a complete success. This all happened last year with the dry out. This was not a demand management project, and I want to stress that. This was a research project hoping to give information to feed the feasibility of demand management within our state, and hopefully for the Upper Basin in general. I think that our neighbors up here in Grand County at the headwaters, as we've seen a changing river for the last 2 decades, there wasn't a lot of conversation to twist their arms into understanding this, because we all come from the mindset that we know we have challenges. We know we have a changing climate. We know we have changing water supply. Our supply demand gap is getting of quite concern. And we also want to be part of solutions within this, but we want to do it on credible science, as much research and information as possible, hoping to get to the finish line. And with that, where my heart, beyond understanding consumptive use associated with our crop type, for the purpose of following agriculture on perennial crop grounds, there also hasn't been much research at higher altitudes associated with the recovery of these crops. So what does it really mean for the long term? And for me, when I look at climate change and other issues, our soil matters. And we need healthy soils within this river basin. It's one of our first lines of defense. And so when I look at the topic in general, we might be able to shut some headgates on agriculture and find some immediate water savings. I'm concerned about some of that conversation in the long term about what it really means to what we're doing within our soils, not only for local food production, but also for the long term of how we as a culture, a river basin are addressing climate change. And so my ultimate hope in the long term of this, as we have piloted some very early stage projects that are not really to be celebrated or anything else, but we're trying to tie the connectivity of, if we can ultimately stress some land and look at what it means to the soil type. A lot of times in higher altitude production, you'll get a scenario within the soil that's called a sod bound soil condition. And that is a super dense, shallow root system that happens within the hay meadow. And when you do that, interseeding anything else for purposes of feed value, other production, nitrogen fixing plants, anything else, it's very hard to get something to take in a condition that's called sod bound. And so I try and look at this, and we will continue on with other projects and minor projects this year, but that we're actually finding that having fallowed or curtailed irrigation water to meadows, stressing them heavily with livestock, and then introducing different species of plants that have proved to save water and have very high nutritional feed value for livestock. We might be kind of rewriting a program here as we continue to talk. And for me, I think that everything the panelists have said about partnerships and collaboration, I think that this is our future and how we have a chance to be successful. And I also think innovation right now, and not being afraid to try basically anything and everything, accepting that some of that will fail, some will be good. But the system and process as historically has operated is proving to provide shortage to our basin. And I look at us as, one basin that needs to find ways to unite, work on all this in collaboration, and become as innovative and aggressive on that as possible. Thank you much.
Thank you. And Taylor.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon, and thanks to all the other speakers. I've really enjoyed your comments, and hopefully we'll build on those a little bit. I am just up the road from Paul, or down the road, I'm not quite sure, but up the river, up on the Blue River, which is a tributary to the Colorado as well. So it just shows all of our interconnection to this river system from top to bottom. So before I jump into my thoughts on solutions, I just wanted to give a note about the Nature Conservancy, who we are, how we work. We work in all 50 states. We're a global environmental nonprofit. We work in more than 60 countries, and we work on all sorts of issues, not just water. But here in the Colorado River Basin, we have a Colorado River Basin program just focused on this basin. And the Nature Conservancy started this program about 13 years ago, kind of seeing the writing on the wall, what was coming, and recognizing that this is all about trade-offs. And if we weren't part of the conversation and being part of developing solutions, we could end up with the river being an afterthought. And so we have been able to partner not only with many of you on this call, but other environmental groups to just have a more coordinated presence and in this conversation, and hopefully be a productive partner in all of this. And I would say, in addition to my program, which works across all 7 states and in Mexico, we also have a Arizona chapter that, if you're interested in learning more about our work on the San Pedro and the Verde and our policy work, please do take a look at that work. It's really impressive. So if we switch to talking about solutions, there's a lot of talk right now about the interim guidelines. And that is certainly a really important piece of the overall puzzle, but it is not the whole puzzle. And I think my focus right now is just not losing focus on the many different types of solutions we need to be investing in now. We need to be investigating. We need to be testing ideas, just like Paul mentioned, and others have talked about different solution sets. But we need to first stabilize the system. We are, and the interim guidelines will come in their due time, but we need to have long-term solutions, short-term solutions, mid-term solutions, local solutions, regional solutions. This is 6-dimensional chess. This is not a one-size-fits-all solution set. So we're going to have to be really creative, and again, partnerships will be critical to that. So I wanted to talk about just kind of 4 buckets, and I will say for the Nature Conservancy, our approach has always been focused on this is a water short system. And so that's kind of our starting place in this and how we approach this work. And our work has kind of evolved as we've seen the problem evolve and the partnership opportunities evolve. And so I've kind of got 4 buckets that I just want to highlight that I think we need to be working on all 4 of these. The first is reducing demands. As I mentioned, we're in a system that's over allocated. We are going to have to live with less, and that is not easy. No one wants to do this. And I have to stress that because sometimes people like to point fingers and, well, who has to, live with less? But we all do at some level. And so that's working with agriculture and cities and industry all to find ways to make each drop go further, as Terry said. I would just point out we also can't create new problems, or at least I hope we will not create new problems. And that in particular will be challenging with groundwater. There is often, when surface water supplies are diminished, there is often a shift to groundwater. And I would be concerned that we would be robbing Peter to pay Paul. And we need to be able to look at the ramifications of that and not create new issues and impacts. The second body of work is governance. And this is agreements, but also laws, state laws, regional laws, what have you. But it includes things like the interim guidelines, the minutes, so minute 319 and 323, and there will need to be a new one with Mexico. So those kinds of agreements. We also can do a lot with state laws. So we want to certainly not have laws that encourage waste or over-allocation, overuse. Some examples might be the recent law that was passed in Nevada to get rid of ornamental turf or non-functional turf. It might also include things like water banking, that Utah passed a bill to share water in local basins. So there's a lot we can do in this kind of governance and policy space. The third area is one that is, I think, really top of mind for me, and that's climate resilience. This is an area that is much harder to get a grasp on. It's much more exploratory, but I think it's going to be critical as we come up with these long-term solutions, long-term investments. And so the kinds of things I'm thinking of, and again, this is in reaction to how fast we're seeing the climate change impacts proceed. So examples might include resilience with agriculture. So that could be some of the things that Paul just talked about. It can also be crop switching in certain places where we might be able to invest in crops that can make do with less water. They're better suited to this climate. There's also things we can be doing with soil health. With agriculture, there's things that cities are doing, and again, we kind of stay out of the city's way because they're doing good work, so we can just cheer them on to continue their innovations. Forest management is another area that is of big interest in the upper basin. This is where the water is coming from, and yet we have forests that really are struggling with beetle kill and other issues. And if we can figure out some of the science first on how to do forest management in a way that is ecologically sound, but also can improve resilience higher up in the basin, I think that will pay dividends for the whole basin. Wet meadow restoration, beaver dam analogs, things like that, where we can retain water higher in the system, I think is also going to be important as we move into a drier climate. And finally, an area that is new to the west, but is not new, which is regenerative agriculture. This is a strategy that's worked well in the Midwest, but we don't know if it can work here in the drier soils of the West. So these are all things that need to be explored. They need scientific investment, but I think this climate resilience piece will be important. The fourth bucket is funding. All of these solutions that we're talking about take money, and I think we're going to have to think long-term, but we also have an opportunity right in front of us with the bipartisan infrastructure bill. It's something we all should be supporting, and I would just note that a lot of us in the basin work to get some really good provisions into that bill that have significant funding for this basin. So I would hope that we can all support that bill and help bring more resources to this challenge. So just to wrap up, the time is now. We have had the luxury of time over the last 15 years or so. We don't have that time anymore. We don't have that luxury, and it is a slow-moving train, but it feels like it just picked up speed. So we're going to have to pick up our pace as well to develop these solutions and collaborate. And I would just kind of echo some of the things people said. As the basin supplies get tighter and it gets drier, there is certainly the potential for greater conflict. That is not going to serve us. Pointing fingers will not serve us right now, and I just hope that we can all really focus on collaboration, because we all depend on this river, and so we all have the incentive and motivation to invest in it together.
All right, well, thank you all so much. And we're already almost up to 5 o'clock, and we're only scheduled to go to 5:30, and there's so many things we could discuss and questions to be asked. And I'm going to try to have at least time to ask a question of each of you and see where there might be some interesting conversation. We did get a number of questions in advance, but I want to note, I wrote down a few things. And so I'm sometimes into alliteration where I look at words, that start with the same letter. So I wrote problems, partnerships, and processes. We've been talking about that. And then there are lots of C's, but a couple of them: challenges, crisis, change, conservation, collaboration. All these things are so important to addressing these problems. And so we do want to focus on some of the solutions. And we've heard throughout the conversation today a number of these solutions. But Chairwoman Gray, I thought maybe I'd start with you with a question. And that is, we've heard about conservation. I think you mentioned it and others did. And in fact, I think there was a Google article feed on today, but San Diego and Los Angeles haven't cut back, or certain cities haven't cut back. But you mentioned efforts, and I wonder if you could tell a little bit more about your efforts, and particularly those related to underserved communities.
Getting used to these meetings, but thank you. Thank you for the question. And there was an article that Southern California not done well in the last month, but however, Southern California has really stepped up time and time again to save water and help manage the drought. So most Southern Californians have made really permanent changes. It's part of a strong conservation ethic, I believe. In fact, per capita water use in our region has dropped 40% in the past 3 decades. But even with that, more than 6 out of 10 people who were surveyed said they are willing to do more. So we are helping with multi-million-dollar rebate programs for water efficiency appliances and turf removal. And we're working on programs to expand access to rebates for our underserved communities, what you mentioned. The challenge is that residents in underserved areas may face barriers to accessing rebates for high efficiency appliances that require large upfront purchases. That's a real barrier to some communities. They also may live in apartments and other multifamily buildings without yards, limiting their participation in outdoor programs, such as Metropolitan's turf replacement program or rebates for smart irrigation controllers. A great example of one program that we've enacted recently to address these barriers is one that uses rebates to incentivize contractors to work with property owners to replace older toilets with more efficiency models across entire buildings or apartment complexes. It's been incredibly popular with the first 2 offerings of about 10,000 toilets, each being fully subscribed in less than a day. So it's very popular. And we're also providing education and outreach throughout our region in multiple languages, utilizing social media, radio, and digital media to share tips to conserve. But we're not just asking for the public to do its parts. It'll take more than conservation. We're doing our part as well, planning and investing in infrastructure and science to adapt to climate change. So we are addressing conservation with our communities. Hello? Did we get
Like we lost Sharon.
Yes, Sharon.
Off, and I have very good Wi-Fi these days. I didn't follow the instructions, and I didn't call in, and I don't know, there must have been an electric blip. I'm so sorry. But Chairwoman Flores, the question I wanted to ask is that not all tribes, I think including your own, are using their full allotment of Colorado River water. And that's served others in the process. And I wonder if you would say something about, this was a question that came in advance. So I'm going to read it as it was asked and have you answer it in whatever way you think appropriate. How can the basin wean itself off its dependence on in or underused tribal water rights? Do you have anything you'd like to say about that?
Thank you, Sharon. Yes, and first of all, tribes that have their water right confirmed have those rights for their present and future use. The water and the infrastructure to use the water are the basis of tribal economic sustainability. So Crit here, we plan to fully develop our on-reservation use of our water for our long-term future. And we plan to be here for a long, long time. Then we also think every tribe should have the authority as a matter of tribal sovereignty to decide how they will use their water now and in the future. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
And one other thing, that many tribes may lease their water, and currently Crit is seeking to have this authority also. And we will keep our name on our water, and we will allow others to use it, and we will reap the economic return to our community. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm going to now segue to the upper basin. Paul, thanks for explaining so well of some of what you're doing there, which is amazing. And it points to the importance of kind of knowing the implications, right? I think somebody earlier talked about trade-offs. Well, you got to know some of what's going to happen to know what the trade-offs are. And fallowing's been a hot topic, I believe, up in Colorado for quite some time. And I wondered if you could say a little bit about what role fallowing ag lands has played or might play up in your area.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. You know, when I look at this, I think that every time I think of Colorado River issues, I really try and dig into the basin. And I like to think of it as more of a holistic matter of sustainability rather than a sector against another sector or stakeholder or upper and lower. Is, you know, we look at this, and while agriculture certainly uses most of the water within the river basin, I would hope most people participating in this conversation today also enjoy consuming food, as that's what we do, is grow food to feed the world. And so within that, I think that a particular short-term need in a crisis to help deliver water when and where possible very much might be necessary. But I think that when we look to address that, I don't ever see this as a head gain off, head gate on, take the summer off. And especially when we talk about perennials, I think when we're talking fallowing, annual crop types versus perennials, I think are very critical to look at independent ways of fallow. But especially perennials, is how do we look at this as more of a holistic approach to address our soil health conditions and the crops that we grow using techniques that can be replicated within the basin. And it comes back to the ag innovation, because I think that leaning to ag more in perpetuity to find the water that's necessary for the basin in no way in my mind looks to solve what is our holistic challenge. And so how we continue to work together to do that, but by primarily being able to address soil health matters in the process of what is that fallow, instead of just water on and water off.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of interest in matters of soil health. We're in the process of hiring a new extension specialist in soil health. I was just a speaker at a Oklahoma conference. One of the features was soil health, and it's just coming up all the time. So I appreciate that. I wonder, we've gotten some questions, and Leslie, I'm going to come back to you a minute, because we've also got some questions today that are just kind of basic questions to understand some of what's going on in the basin. But I wonder, Taylor, you mentioned that we have to be thinking about a lot of things at once. There's a tremendous focus within the Colorado River community on renegotiating the guidelines that Leslie explained or interim. But you said there's a lot more we need to do than that. And so I was wondering though, over time, and I am going to go back to the time of the 2007 guidelines when they were being negotiated the few years before that. I was wondering if you could just say a little bit about how the role of the NGO conservation community has changed in over the last 10 to 15 years or more in these processes, kind of what role you're playing in these discussions of Colorado River management.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. So I would say, first of all, a small but mighty group were involved in the 2007 guidelines negotiations. There was a group of NGOs that put together an alternative called Conservation Before Shortage. Happens to be very similar to system conservation and demand management. So, I hope it's a good reminder that the conservation community has good ideas that we can now help implement too. One of the things that has changed significantly is as water affects us all, and it affects communities, it affects agriculture, it touches everything. And so we've had increasing interest from donors. I mean, we're a nonprofit. We are supported by contributions. We have corporations, foundations, and individuals providing significantly more funding to our groups than in the past, because this issue is so fundamental to quality of life, to way of life for all of us. And so I think one thing that's really changed is we have a lot more resources than we have had in the past to help answer many of the questions that we've touched on today. The science work in particular is of high interest for the Nature Conservancy. We're a science-driven organization, and we also believe in working with partners because, I've said many times, if whatever we come up with doesn't work for agriculture or doesn't work for the tribes or the cities, it won't work. And so we have to help answer these questions. And so I think being able to bring legal expertise, technical expertise, engineering, scientific expertise are all ways that we can contribute in a way that we maybe couldn't in the past. We have been involved in things like the basin study at a level that, before we couldn't even quite imagine. I mean, we have modelers on our teams now so that we can really be part of these conversations in a productive way. And I would just add that, I think we certainly realize that we are not going to be able to solve the environmental challenges facing this river without helping solve the challenges facing our communities. So that's kind of that we're all in this together piece. And I just feel like I hope we have proven that we are a constructive partner. We've been part of Minute 319 and 323, and we're ready to do so again in this next round of conversations and negotiations.
Well, I'm going to kind of drill down a little bit and then take it back up to Leslie at the federal level. We've heard about Paul and his neighbors and what they're doing. We've heard about Colorado River Indian tribes and Metropolitan Water District. But a question that often comes up is, what can I do as an individual? And I wonder, Terry Goddard, if you might want to talk about what you see as important actions that individuals could take.
I'd love to do that if I can.
We're hearing you. Terry, you can say something. We heard you. Oh, then you went away. Oh, now you're muted.
Oh,
Terry, you need to unmute.
Now we hear you. Now we hear you. Oh, but you're going off again.
now can you hear me? I'm sorry.
Yes, we can.
Okay, because my little icon still says I'm muted. While we're talking about the massive impact of agriculture I think the individual contribution gets lost pretty quickly. But Chairwoman Gray mentioned some of the things they're doing in Los Angeles in terms of low flow devices, turf reduction, and low flow toilets. All of those play a role. I think it's part of the challenge to all our communities that we need to get more out of our water. And I think if there's any one lesson from this wake-up call, it's that it is a basin-wide and every individual, all hands on deck, I guess. It's every individual needs to play a role. And that involves changing an attitude, again, basin-wide, about where our water comes from and how much we have available, and becoming extraordinarily conserving as a new ethic. And one thing, I used to be a city official, and one of the great little citizen empowerment devices that came out a few years ago was when somebody saw graffiti or saw a trash buildup, they could flash it on their iPhone and immediately report it to the appropriate city agency. There was no intermediary. I think we ought to look into that kind of a citizen activism for water wastage. If somebody's overwatering their lawn and it's running in the street, take a picture and turn them in. I think that kind of citizen activism is what we're going to see in the future, and it's long overdue.
Yeah, Terry, it's interesting because, we've had the water police in Tucson. I don't know if they're still around anymore, but we used to have them. But now with cell phones, they were around before cell phones. It's a lot easier than depending on people to drive around the streets for that. So I'm watching the clock, and I want to give people a chance to give some summary statements, but there are a couple questions I still want to squeeze in there. We got a question submitted that I really thought was an important one to look at, and we don't have a lot of time to develop a curriculum, but there was a question: any suggestions on how to teach this subject to my earth and space science high school students in Arizona? And I thought that was a really important question. And Leslie, I think you wanted to take a shot at that.
Oh, Sharon, yes, thank you. I'd love to take a shot at that. And I wish, we could spend weeks talking about this and the importance of it. But I think I want to tie back in maybe to what other folks have been saying here and why this specific issue is so important, and maybe step back from a bigger view. And that is that, we live in a time where sometimes we just want to oversimplify or compartmentalize things, and we want to go to our corners and come out swinging. And, the whole Colorado River issue, water supply, water availability, is really one that has a very intricate series and system of laws and policies and priorities. And we get into these shortages, and we have a way of looking at that. And it seems like it's all very, it's all very functional and fundamental. You cut by priority, you follow the laws, you follow this. But I don't think that's the case at all, which is why we keep coming back to the negotiating table over and over and over again. Because what we really need to do is we need to bring together all of the parties that have an interest and a stake and a priority, and we need to develop consensus. And so while we could look at this from so many different ways, from an educational perspective, we have scientific, we have modeling and predictive modeling and hydrology and all sorts of things that we can get ourselves messy with to understand. And we have accounting and institutional issues, and we have the history that would show us what the perspectives were in the past and how to get to where we are today, and what in government and what are legal and institutional and water rights and tribal sovereignty. And then, we have all of the things that we want to wrap this around, which is the languages and having a common understanding, and really what it all wraps around. And I think I would love to develop a big class project. And I know that there's a very small amount of room in curriculum for things like this, but I would hope that we would be able to tie it back to state standards, where we could assign students a perspective, and they could research that and come back and understand, and then talk together, which is exactly what we do through all of this, right? It was the basis in Arizona of the steering committee and now the Arizona Reconsultation Committee, that you bring together competing interests. You try to understand each other's positions. You have folks that need water and folks that have water and have high priorities and low priorities. And we need informed consent. We need consensus building. We need, ultimately what this is it's a metaphor for everything that's going on in our world, I think, and in so many other ways and places. But really, I would say, as we're teaching the kind of intricacies of what all of this means and what the background is, there would be no right or wrong answer if a class or a group of students tried to come together to find a resolution. Just like we know that we've developed answers over and over again over the years, or responses over and over again over the years. And a couple of years later, we can look back and say, well, now, that was fine. That was the best we could do then, but now we'll do this. And, perhaps we'd find some really creative ideas, or at least we'd open folks' minds to that whole approach. And anyway, I just thought
Thank
that
you for that.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and I want to put in a plug for Arizona Project WET. I mean, they do have water curriculum throughout the state and beyond. Arizona Project WET does it for Arizona. They actually have a curriculum book on the Colorado River. They have some in Spanish, but some of that was written kind of probably 20 years ago or 15 years ago. And so that's a topic for another day. We may need to come back and do that and hear more about that. We are running out of time. I want to note that, maybe when the, I believe a post-webinar email will go out, or will that happen, Kathy Jacobs, that a post-webinar email will go out?
Yes, there's an evaluation form that will go out and has an opportunity for comments.
I wonder if we could put in a couple of websites for some of the questions. Like there was a question about what does Deadpool mean? And I've got to say that I was talking about Deadpool in a talk recently, and I wanted to make sure I had the definition right myself. And we don't have time for that, but maybe we could give Bureau, I think I might have looked at the Bureau of Reclamation site, Leslie, to make sure I got that right. So maybe we can give some resources in that follow-on email. There was also a question about, I'm going to paraphrase it, but why doesn't the federal government just kind of do this all and coordinate this for all of us? And I guess we need to tell people to read The Law of the River like it's a book to read, but it is a very kind of overlapping federal system that I don't think we can give a quick answer to that. So I want to apologize. There are many questions that came in either before or during today's webinar. We don't have time to answer, but I do think that our speakers have given us just a tremendous amount of information and perspective. Leslie, you talked, I think, about the word perspective in your comments. So I would like to ask you all, and we are running on, pretty late on time, if you could maybe take a minute, and that way if you go a little over, it's a minute and a half, to just maybe give some closing thoughts about some final words on solutions, processes, what you hope people will take away from this event. And I'm going to go in reverse order of how we went in. And Leslie, I think you've already done that. So I'm going to go to the panelists. I think you gave a great overview in your comments here. So I'm going to start with Taylor and go up through the remaining panelists.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. I just want to point out the bigger perspective of what's at play here. I got a call Friday from the State Department looking for ideas for what's happening in the Colorado River Basin as they think about how to invest foreign policy around the world dealing with these similar issues. And one thing I keep coming back to is the story of climate change will be written in water, either too much or too little at the wrong time, because essentially climate change is water change. And so my hope for this basin is that we do pick up our pace a little bit here now that we know how urgent things are, but that the Colorado River can be a model for the rest of the world. We have a lot to teach. We also have a lot to learn, so we shouldn't be afraid to reach out to our fellow countries and learn from them as well. But I would like to see us be a model for how to do this right and how to adapt to this quickly changing future.
Thank you, Taylor. Paul?
We didn't coordinate this, but Taylor literally just stole my punchline. So when we received our first grant of significance as a group of neighbors and collaborators here to work on the Colorado River for our ag infrastructure and the resiliency and health of our river system, a mentor of mine told me on the telephone as I was celebrating and bragging to this individual that I wasn't thinking about this big enough. And so conversation went on, and then I ended up explaining to this person that, oh, so I should talk about the entire Southwest or the Western United States. And, and we should have that conversation. He goes, no, you're still not thinking about it big enough. And then he said, call me tomorrow morning. And I called him the following morning, and I said, yeah, I slept on it. So we should just talk about global water issues, how somewhere between water quantity or water quality that the entire globe faces challenges with fresh water supply. And he said, yep, now you're thinking about it. And on that note, as I hate to be repetitive, but these were my closing remarks. I support what Taylor said, is I think we need to think about, I'll be thinking about this in a grand scale. And I'm the same, that the group of panelists on this, the people that I work with water in, if we can find a way, to continue conversation with our communities, I believe we can be a model for the world. And I hope it happens that way.
Thank you, Paul. Terry?
My little icon isn't working. Can you hear me?
We can hear you wonderfully.
Oh, good. Well, it still says I'm muted, but never mind. I won't take the superficial as the message. I don't want to also sort of slavishly follow Taylor, but she said something that I think needs repeating, and that is the pace of change is accelerating. We were, I think, blessed in many ways because of some foresight that allowed the DCP to be agreed to in the basin, and it held off the shortage in Lake Mead by at least 3 years. And that was an amazing piece of work by the entire basin. But now it's upon us. The tier 1 has been declared, and we're already looking at tier 2, 2A, 2B, and 3 as right around the corner. And just a month ago, the need for a 1030 consultation was triggered by a very pessimistic projection in the lake. That means, Sharon, that words like Deadpool are part of the language. They need to be, and we need to pull together to make sure that neither of the Great Lakes, neither of our Great Lakes, go into extremist situations. And I believe personally that that's going to take more than just chipping away at the edges. It's going to take a real change in attitude, a change in the way we do business in the entire basin. And I guess that's my message. This is not a drill. It's very serious, and it's happening quicker than the changes in the past have happened. And so in the next 2 to 3 years, we may well be into emergency efforts to keep the lake from going way too low.
In fact, I'd like to know, one of the pre-submitted questions said, so are we talking about tier 4 and what that means? So to your point, Terry. Chairwoman Gray.
Right, thank you. There's been a lot of attention, obviously, on the drought and the Colorado River shortage. And I see this as an opportunity to make big decisions that will make sure we have a reliable and sustainable water supply, and to take actions that help bring the river into balance. And to do this, I really believe we need to pull together for greater investment in our water systems. We have to call for more conservation across the board. And I know that we can find even more efficient ways for our water use. And so it is important. We've heard collaboration, we've heard partnerships. I believe it's important, as we all do, that we have to work together. We've got to work together to develop these new solutions that will help the Colorado River, our communities, to be more sustainable and more resilient. So working together would be critical as we navigate the obstacles ahead. It's very important. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Chairwoman Flores, for the panel, you've got the final word.
Oh, thank you, Sharon. But today's discussion on this panel, and I want to thank everybody for your valuable insights. But today's discussion documents how we can collaborate to save the life of this mighty Colorado River. And I think my colleagues have expressed it all of what I wanted to say too, but I just want to leave you all with this, not doom and gloom, but you know, we're living in a pandemic right now, the COVID-19 pandemic. And I see that our river is in a pandemic right now, and our river is sick. Our river is being attacked by a disease of overuse. And it's sick, it's unhealthy, also by the drought. So we all have to do our part to save the river. The river has taken care of us for time immemorial, and now we have to take care of the river. So thank you for allowing me these few words to say, and everybody stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you. And I didn't plan it that way, but I don't think anybody does want to say anything after that, Chairwoman Flores. So thank you for that.
Sorry.
No, I mean, that's really powerful. And so with that, Kathy Jacobs, I'm going to turn it over to you. And of course, I thank all of the panelists and Leslie for a great job in imparting your perspectives and knowledge and insights. So Kathy?
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you so much, panelists. That was brilliant and really insightful. We just want to emphasize that the role of the University of Arizona in these conversations is one that we take really seriously. We see ourselves as conveners and potential sources of solutions and information. We have hosted something called the Colorado River Conversations over the past several years, and are happy to help. So we want to make sure that universities as sort of neutral conveners can be part of the process going forward. It's going to be a tough multiple years as we get to 2026. And so we want to make sure that you all know we're here to help. Thank you very much for joining us. And please note that we have 2 more in this series. The next one's about water and infrastructure, building for the future, and we will have a keynote who's an expert on the infrastructure bill and what's happening in Washington as far as infrastructure related opportunities and activities, as well as a lot of local perspectives on that. So that will be very useful. And then our final topic is biodiversity, water, and climate change, noting that the implications for animals and plants are potentially far more significant than they are even for humans. We wanted that to be the final sort of note in this series. Feel free to go to the link and sign up for those and go forward and save water. Thank you all very much for your time and your energy, and we look forward to our next episode. And again, thanks to Sharon, that was a great job. And also thanks to our team. We have a great team behind the scenes. You can't even see them, but Maya, Maggie, Amanda, thank you so much. Bye, everybody.